Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Morgan. I am the communications manager for Socrates Sculpture Park. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Just give me a moment so I can share my screen. Great. And I'm going to turn on closed captioning so that that will be available for anyone who might want it. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that Socrates Sculpture Park is on the unceded territories and ancestral lands of the Lenape, Canarsie, and Matinecock peoples. And sorry, I'm in the park's office and it looks like there is someone at the door currently. Happening in real time. Hey, Terrence. Anyways, thank you all for coming this evening to this event, which is the first in a series that we are having with the 2020 Socrates Annual Artist Fellows. And this event is a conversation with three of those fellows, Patrick Costello, Jenny Polak, and Aya Rodriguez-Izumi. And moderating the discussion is the park's curatorial assistant, Danilo Machado. And unfortunately, I realized I have to stop the closed captioning for a moment so that I can properly introduce Danilo with his bio, so one moment. Danilo Machado is a poet, curator, and public programmer living on occupied land. Interested in language's potential for revealing tenderness, erasure, and relationships to power, Danilo is the curator of the exhibitions Otherwise Obscured, Erasure in Body and Text, Franklin Street Works 2019 to 2020, and Support Structures, the 8th Floor Gallery virtual exhibition 2020 to 2021. A 2020 to 2021 Poetry Project Emerge Surface B Fellow and producer of public programs at the Brooklyn Museum, their writing has been featured in Hyperallergic, Brooklyn Rail, Art Papers, Art Critical, Tayo Literary Magazine, among others. They're working to show up with care for their communities. Thank you, Danilo. And I'm gonna pass the mic over to you and share my screen again.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to be in conversation with these three brilliant artists and to be in conversation with you all and hope y'all engage in some question and answer towards the end. In this first part of the program, each of the artists will be sharing some images from their work at Socrates, part of the exhibition Monuments Now, and then we'll be in conversation together and take some questions. But first, I want to introduce Patrick Costello. Patrick completed his MFA in Combined Media at Hunter College in 2018 and earned a BA in printmaking from the University of Virginia in 2008. His work has been exhibited at the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, as well as independent and alternative spaces nationally and abroad, including Cinema Balash, Brooklyn, Space 1026, Philadelphia, Transpop, and Tokyo. He has performed in venues including Ars Nova, the Eugenie O'Neill Theater Center in Waterford, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Space Gallery in Portland, and a sheep farm in Waikoa, New Zealand. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you. Hello. I'm so excited to be here in conversation with Aya and Jenny. Thanks to Danilo and Jess and Sarah and the rest of the folks at Socrates. So this is my piece for the show. It's called Seeding Ground. And this is an aerial image by James Trezon. So first, a little background. This piece began with a question. What might my personal perspective add to a conversation about the removal of monuments, especially when those monuments depict people that look like me? I want to acknowledge that this conversation is probably most transformative when I work to center, support, and amplify the efforts of BIPOC organizers and artists. At the same time, for many years now, I've been curious about what it might look like to practice making art as an anti-racist white artist. So in 2017, this is kind of a little background about this piece. In 2017, white supremacists descended upon my hometown of Charlottesville, Virginia. Emboldened by the presidential administration and incensed by a proposal to remove the city's Robert E. Lee monument, they murdered Heather Heyer, brutally assaulted DeAndre Harris, and terrorized anti-racist protesters, including many of my loved ones. In response, the city of Charlottesville put up orange construction fencing to protect the statue and the surrounding gardens, ensuring the site's preservation while legal battles drag on into the present about whether or not they should take it down. So in this picture, it shows the project and how seeding ground echoes and replaces the dimensions of Charlottesville's fenced-in territory in an effort to transform that contested space. I've removed the perimeter fence and the statue at its center. That's what that hole in the center is. Leaving garden beds surrounding an unoccupied rectangle of bare earth. Making that central void accessible invites viewers to come in and repopulate the position of the erstwhile statue, shifting our perspective from gazing up at a bronze figure to looking out, around, and down at the ground. Next slide, please. So here's an image that shows kind of what it looks like, or what it looked like to enter the space in maybe October sometime. So monuments in the US reinforce power structures and uphold many long-held formal conventions too, from their bronze sculptures to the designed landscapes that surround their pedestals. Following suit, Charlottesville's Lee Monument is flanked by highly manicured gardens of English boxwoods, Japanese hollies, and peonies, plants initially found overseas and introduced to this continent as a direct result of colonial economies. Interrupting that lineage, seeding ground references the historical ecologies of its specific site, overflowing with a collection of flora that grew within 100 miles of what is now Socrates Sculpture Park for generations prior to the initial arrival of my European ancestors to this land. In this image, you can see a bunch of the 39 different species included in the piece. Asters, goldenrods, sedges, and grasses create a dense habitat for pollinators of all kind. Tending this garden in New York City, where I've lived for the past 7 years, provides me with a regular physical practice that helps reconcile the spiritual distance between where I'm from, Charlottesville, and where I currently reside. And as the police in both places continue to illustrate, the two cities are more alike than their relative locations belie. White supremacy and the systems it spawns continue to wreak havoc in both places and all over this country. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite plants in the piece, Asclepias incarnata, swamp milkweed. And so these 39 plant species remind us of a time before white supremacy sculpted our collective consciousness and our expectations of public space. They predate white supremacy and indeed continue to thrive without any regard for our human-made systems. They persist even as people label them as weeds and smother them with lawns, parking lots, and buildings. In surrounding that central space of absence with these specific plant communities, I'm not attempting to revive native ecosystems of the past or to vilify introduced species either. I'm deliberately collapsing these ecologies across time and geography in the hopes that doing so may reshape our presence within potential landscapes to come. I had hoped that my work here would reveal something definitive, but this garden takes all these questions and provides wisdom in its seasonally shifting form. It takes a terrible sculpture of a dead racist it takes a terrible sculpture of a dead racist and then takes back space for other living things. The plants grow, bloom, and go dormant. The bugs make their homes there, eat, and in turn pollinate the flowers. Sun, wind, rain, snow, park visitors, birds, powdery mildew, all of these things affect the garden's form, with only minimal presence of my hand. The piece is a space filled with actions and attempts, rather than one positing answers and solutions. Okay, that's all I have.
Thanks so much, Patrick. And just a quick note on the chat, if you want to send a message to the attendees as well as the panelists, you should click the option in the drop-down menu. Otherwise, Zoom automatically just sends it to the panelists. So thank you for your lovely comments so far. But if you'd like to have everybody share your thoughts or see your thoughts or questions, you can choose that option. So next is Jenny Polack. Jenny Polack's work reimagines domestic space as a political arena and gathers people to create together in public space. She makes site and community responsive art that reframes immigrant-citizen relations and amplifies demands for social justice. Coming to the US from England, her background in architecture and her family history of migration drive her projects about outwitting hostile authorities, racist profiling, and abusive prison and detention policies, and citizen-non-citizen collaborations. Welcome, Jenny.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me come to speak. And thanks, Danilo, for the introduction. This is my piece in the park, which I call Offshore. It was conceived as a critique of the practice of locking up people in, originally I was thinking about of offshore prisons and prison camps and migrant camps that cause so much harm and give societies the illusion that they are protected and but actually just cause huge amounts of damage to part of the population that needs to be included. And so this structure is cantilevered out over the East River on the edge of the park. In a sense, I thought of it as a future monument looking backwards. So I tried to think of it as a hopeful kind of monument looking backwards to a time when such prisons and camps were obsolete and were no longer used to warehouse people. I also always thought of the park in relation to Rikers Island, which is just round the bend of the East River, really very close by. It's one of the most infamous jails in the country, for those who don't know. Rikers Island Jail. It's an enormous jail, New York City jail. So this, in a way, the structure provides a connection to this mini Rikers that I've put on the end of the platform, but it also is impassable. And the way that I have tried to problematize that is by inviting people, local people from the community around who have had experience of prison. I ran a kind of engagement process whereby two different amazing groups in the vicinity that have done amazing work with people who've suffered through and survived prison, agreed to work with me to provide these pennants that I attached to the fence. And they, one was the Fortune Society Writers Group, and the other is the Our Children Working Women's Group. We met over the summer and discussed the kind of messaging that could happen here, and amazing poems and statements very generously were contributed by people in those groups. Can we have the next slide, please? So in order to make sure that the text on the, oh, hang on, can we go back to my second slide? We seem to be whizzing forward through the slides. So in order to make sure that the messages were visible, as part of the installation, I installed this optical viewer that you can see being used here that aligns with the prison cage and magnifies dramatically the messages. But you can choose to look in any direction. Can you stay on this slide, please? And however, if you want to look straight across, which is the direction of Gracie Mansion, the mayor's residence on the other side of the river, you cannot see it without looking through and past and at, I hope, these messages from many, many people who are sharing their experience of incarceration. As you can see in the left image, I made a seat so that people can also sit there and contemplate the messages and the structure. Can we have the next slide, please? You can see here more the context, which was important to me. The park, the edge of the park, for those who haven't been there, has this long collapsed dock. I always thought about it as the decay of structures being very expressive of the decay of aspects of society that need to be pushed into the past, that to remind us that things are not always stuck in the same way. Things we think cannot be changed, maybe they can be changed, and until they are, you know, all sorts of injustices have been stuck seemingly for generations until somebody thought, actually, it doesn't have to be this way, and did something about it. So the context of Hallett's Cove in the background as well is important to me. The community, much of the community that uses the park lives in the projects on the other side and around the edges. And were people who watched as I built this structure, came often regularly and asked me about it. And it was a very supportive environment in the park. So that's my.
Thanks so much, Jenny. And next we have Aya Rodriguez-Izumi, who is an interdisciplinary artist whose work blends installation, performance, video, and beyond to explore aspects of ritual retention and cultural identity informed through histories that risk erasure. She was born in Okinawa, Japan, and grew up between that island and East Harlem, New York, where she currently lives and holds a studio. In 2019, she joined the MFA Fine Art faculty at her graduate alma mater of SVA, and the culmination of her project, Echoes of the Battle of Okinawa, a sounds piece based on the book Okinawa's Tragedy that documents firsthand Okinawan experience during World War II, is set to debut in 2021. A preview is included in Wishful Images, currently on view at the National University of Singapore. Welcome, Aya.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming here and being with all of us today. I'm super excited as well to be in conversation here today with Jenny and Patrick. And it's great to see them because, you know, we were together in the summer making all of our pieces there. So it's great to be back here with them. And thanks to Danilo and Jess and Sarah for putting this all together. So this past summer, I made this piece, Gate 2, at Socrates Sculpture Park. It was actually my second time applying with this same piece. So if you are out there and like applying, keep applying, you know? You never know. Look at us here today. So this piece really comes out of a lot of my research and a lot of the things that Danilo had touched about and was originally created as a monument dedicated to communities that have experienced militarization. In Okinawa, there is still a large US military population that is present on the island. So it's really about the history of the space and similar spaces, the continuation and the effects that that kind of long history really has on the current communities that are there, and also the diaspora, because I guess, like, you know, I am part of that Okinawan diaspora, being in Okinawa and East Harlem a lot of the times, and this idea of kind of having one foot in two different places. Great. Sarah, can you get that next slide? Oh, and thank you to Nick Knight at Socrates for taking this great picture. So you saw in the last image, you know, the sculpture is this shape of, maybe we should go back. Sorry, Sarah, could you go back one more? Sorry. I've messed it up. I've messed up the order. So just to like describe what the shape looks like for any folks who are out there. So this shape, this kind of like gateway shape, is really pointing to a Turi, which is a gateway that is usually placed in front of Shinto shrines in Japan, but using these materials of galvanized steel and chain link fencing and these barbed wire arms as pulling from the materials that are in the landscape of Okinawa. And you can see, like, underneath there's also just lengths of beads. All right, go ahead, go to that next slide, Sarah. So you saw how many beads there were in that thing. You see how many beads are behind me. I did not make all of these beads myself. A big contributor was my mom, but also a lot of the beads were made by folks in and around Socrates Sculpture Park. I want to make sure I don't forget anybody's names, but I think we're going to talk about it more later as well. But you know, through Socrates, we were able to partner with a lot of local places like Green Girls that the park was already partnering with. Some organizations that are nearby, like Mindful Astoria, and also Reality House, and also photographed here, this really great group called Minor Miracles that was started by the park's ground manager, Eric, that is at Socrates Sculpture Park. So in this photo, this is from one of the beading sessions with Sade Amor, Logan Matlock, Janelle Richards, and Jalen Stewart. So those were the folks that were part of that program this past summer. And yeah, we had to do this all during COVID. So it's like, how do we do this, you know, now? And there was also kind of like, you know, ulterior motives of trying to connect with folks with these beading sessions, but I'll talk about that more later. All right, hit me with that last slide, Sarah. And I wanted this last slide to just be a video. I'm going to also put the link in the chat in case anybody wants to like go to the YouTube and watch it yourself. But a lot of this piece is really about interacting with it, walking through it. So I wanted to put a short video of kind of like what it is like inside of that beaded cascade. if the sound works on this Zoom, there's a lot of wind too, so you might want to turn down your headphones a little bit, but you can also hear like the beads kind of like hitting against each other and the sounds of the park. So it's really like this immersive experience. All right, hit me with that video, Sarah. So it's a little choppy, but you know, so is Zoom. But if you want to check out the YouTube, feel free to check out this video there. And it's really this kind of like, you know, the piece is really at the mercy of the elements that are around it. So if it is a windy day, those strands of beads are flapping around. But yeah, it's really became like this really great representation of the community coming together and creating this piece together. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you all for sharing some insight into your work at Socrates. And I was so glad to be able to see the show recently and to sort of experience all of your work in person and also in relationship to each other and to the other work in the show. And sort of my first question is around this, how you were thinking about how visitors would interact with the piece and move around the piece, and particularly would look at the piece. You know, a few of you talked about sort of what your work, how your work was intended to be looked at, and what you were doing in terms of the different gazes involved, both sort of literal and sort of conceptual. Yeah, so anybody can start. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I think I'm very interested in that question because I thought I constructed the Offshore piece very much with the idea that the act of looking can be a kind of an action. It isn't just necessarily a passive act. And I wanted to frame it like that. In the sense that the incredible expansion in this country of mass incarceration is nonetheless kind of hidden from view, and so the whole idea of the structure of this jetty kind of directing your view through the edge of the perimeter of Socrates and into a symbolic jail or cage is to ask people not to look away and to kind of take in what you're seeing and think about it. And the binocular viewer that magnifies is a kind of culmination of that in a way. So that it dramatizes the act of looking. You can you can turn the viewer all around, but if you look at if you look in the direction its axis points, you're looking at and into the prison cage that's constructed there. And I've seen, and people have been doing that, which is wonderful. So it's a very tempting kind of thing, this binocular viewer. Many children have climbed on it. It's really kind of attractive. So I wanted it to be a kind of a attraction within the park, almost, to say, yeah, come and look, and then, you know, think about what is being said by the people who've contributed the messages on the pennants, and take something away from that.
Yeah, I love how you sort of appropriated this sort of tool that's often used for tourism, and even sometimes demands like money from people or coins from people to get a closer look of, you know, the skyline or whatever they're looking at, and used it, you know, had it free and used it so that folks could do that sort of active looking both around and maybe most poignantly through, which also makes me think about, Aya, what you were saying in terms of sort of through the bead curtain. When I was there with a friend, I was like, how clear can we see each other on opposite sides of the curtain? And obviously like increased poignancy for me because we hadn't seen each other in a long time, but also like couldn't see each other closely and needed to be distant anyway. So I'm curious about your reflections.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think there's like a little over 600 individual beaded strands. So it's pretty dense. But definitely it is a piece that is meant to be crossed through by passing through it. You know, traditionally this idea of a Turi is supposed to be this kind of threshold between a space that is the everyday and then passing through into the sacred. But really this piece has like no front end, like there's no front or back. So it's like, what is the everyday? What is sacred? And also making this piece and thinking about it now and thinking about, you know, what it is. I think in a lot of ways it also is, you know, kind of a portrait of how can we all be gateways to more information, gateways to, you know, telling people about our culture, gateways to, you know, just spreading voices and narratives. But really, in a lot of these pieces, and especially this piece, the point that folks really started interacting with it was when we started making. There was, you know, of course, like at Socrates, we have this like open studio space. So you're constantly engaging with the public. They're, you know, stopping in, asking like, what are you doing? What are you up to? You know, and they want to have a conversation. And really these beading sessions was such a crucial part of making this piece, and really just about the meaning of the piece too, as a way of creating community, a way of connecting. And was also, you know, we tried in a couple different ways. We also had, I think, like 2 public beading sessions. And these beading sessions were also a moment to have like an engaged group of people and try and get them to think about things while we're also doing something fun, you know? So while we were doing these beading sessions, I was also asking a set of questions that I had come up with the last time I was in Okinawa, and thinking about when we had asked these questions now too. It was really interesting. But I had like a set of maybe about 10 questions, you know, and I think of them as like 10 questions from a militarized zone, but they were questions all the way from, have you ever eaten Spam before? To, are there active protests in your neighborhood? And can you hear the difference between a tactical aircraft and a commercial airplane? And we really worked with like a wide range of people, from like kids with the green girls and with minor miracles who are kind of like young adults, all the way up to adults and veterans with Mindful, Astoria, and Reality House, and even just the folks that came to like stop by when we had the open session. So I would say that, yeah, the finished piece is definitely, there's a way that, you know, there's like an intentional way of folks engaging with that piece and getting access to the information. But the engagement starts with the creation process, and really just that process of having that conversation with the public.
Yeah, definitely. And Patrick, I love when you were describing your work sort of as being counter to someone looking up at a statue, and instead sort of encouraging looking down and looking around. I'm curious if you wanted to share more around that.
Sure. Yeah, I think there was something really exciting to me when I thought about thought about making a monument where I was like, I don't actually want to make a sculpture. I don't want to direct people to some kind of like amazing creation that I've formed with my sculptor's tools or something. I was like, there's so much about this conversation about monuments that's about context, that's about the things that are around these giant sculptures and what they mean. And there's also so much that is around us all the time. There are birds, even in New York City, that are all the time going along the transatlantic flyway, and there are plants all the time, and some of those plants were introduced to this place, and some of them have been here since as far back as anyone can ever remember. And I just wanted to kind of redirect attention to those issues around these giant sculptures, to these plants and locations and questions that are kind of that frame these bronzes that we traditionally associate with monuments. And I think also it was just important for me. I'm excited to be with Jenny and Aya here, because I wanted to break that space of that central space where the monument was. I wanted to break it so that somebody could walk through it. And even if they weren't paying attention to the context around them, the plants and all these things, they would walk through it and there's two other monuments at the other side, you know, regardless of which direction you go. And to me, that was something really exciting, that that maybe I could provide a space that people would just move through on their way to something else. And yeah, so Jenny's piece is kind of at one end of mine, which is sort of exciting. And then Aya's piece is this gate that you also kind of go through and think about that passage. And so, yeah, that's kind of more about my thoughts about the viewer. And so.
Yeah, I love that through line through all of your work, and another one is sort of all your partnerships with different groups and different community members. And Amanda commends you for your engagement with communities, especially under current circumstances, as do I. But I'm curious if you wanted to speak further upon that, like what those collaborations meant and added to your projects in different ways.
I feel a huge debt of gratitude, actually, Socrates helped me connect with the organizations that I worked with. And despite the COVID restrictions, in the end, we didn't meet face to face. I didn't meet hardly any of the people that I worked with, but we could see each other at least on Zoom, and had several meetings and discussions. And finally, a few of the people have been able to come. We've had visits with a couple of the groups that contributed messages, and they've been able to look at the whole exhibition, which also is a really important part of it. Even though Socrates is there in the community, I love the idea that these kinds of interactions introduce new audiences into the park that may not have known about it before. I found some of the people did, but some didn't know it was there. And Socrates was able to stay open throughout, was really, it made it one of the few kind of art venues that was able to stay open. But yeah, so when I first imagined, and when I first kind of submitted the idea for Offshore, I hadn't gotten a clear idea about how I was going to introduce the messages and the kind of presence of the people themselves into it. So once, actually, like Aya, I had submitted this more than once. And I had been told there's no way, initially I was told, you can't build outside the boundaries of Socrates. So I'm hugely grateful to Jess, the courage of the curators in this case, for allowing me to breach the boundary in this way, because it was very important to the expression of the piece that it be out of bounds in a sense. But I didn't really preconceive the way that the messages would be presented. I didn't have a previous relationship with these particular groups in the neighborhood. I've worked around a lot of issues to do with immigrant detention mostly, and around communities that are working to end immigrant detention in their neighborhoods. But so I tend to ask whatever institution I'm working with, what are your connections? What connections can we find locally to work with? And so in this case, these two wonderful organizations came on board. I was very, very interested to work with the Our Children Working Women, which is especially for women who've been released, who've been freed finally. And I had no sense of that experience. Several of the women had the experience of having children in prison, which they were very open about. And it's so important, I think, that people in the community who don't necessarily know about these experiences are given access to them. So I really commend all the people who came forward and agreed to say something about their very personal experience. Some of it's very personal, and then some are really kind of sharp, almost political science statements, which some of the people were already making in their writing group. There were, some of these are actually published poets in their own right, I discovered, and I have huge respect for the work that they're doing in sharing these ideas with a view to ending mass incarceration, and prison abolition would be the kind of wish behind this work.
Yeah, and Corbin asked if you can share some of the messages on the pennants. I don't know if you remember some off the top of your head, highlights for you.
I can. I can't share my screen, or I could give you more close up, but I did grab some of the, so I first of all copied the text onto the pennant shape, so I can sort of show you. Cool. I had to make them small enough to fit on my scanner. They've all been printed in a screen printing process so that there would be a small addition, so that the people who made them will also get some for their own rooms, their own spaces. But this one, for example, is an amazing poet who's been working with the Fortune Society's writing group. He said, and this is part of, he wrote, this is one verse really. Stop killing us. Let us live before we become you to overcome you, and the world becomes what you think it is already. I need to give you the name of this poet, but it'll take me a moment because I have it right here. Hilton Webb, that's Hilton Webb. So I hope people will remember his name. He's written some amazing stuff. That's just one example. I don't want to hog the, I want to also say that it was amazing to work alongside Aya and Patrick, and there was a great spirit of, of sharing ideas and even kind of sources of materials. Aya had found this wonderful fence supplier which I was able to go to as well for my fences, because I had to have them kind of custom, a custom size. And so these kinds of things really come from the program bringing artists together, I think.
Yeah, and the Hilton is on the call.
Oh, hey, Hilton. That's wonderful. I hope I did justice to your words. Thank you.
Great. Aya or Patrick, any sort of reflections upon the sort of collaborators during this process, or even like reflections about each other's work? I love the connections y'all have been making with each other.
Yeah, I'll go, I guess. Yeah, I felt like it was a really, even in the park, it kind of just the workspace created a really collaborative kind of exercise for all of us, even though we were working on really different things. But it was like, a thing of like talking to each other and trying to help each other out. I guess the kind of like community aspect in my project is, really kind of like at the root, the whole point of the piece is to get the community to come in. Shout out to Audrey at Socrates, who really, worked hard in pulling all of these partnerships. And she was a really big part of getting those sessions to become reality. And it was really, I think, especially for public works, I think it's really important for the community around it to feel like they are part of it and feel like some kind of like ownership of the piece as well. So it was really interesting, as we kept working on all of our pieces and folks were coming into the park to contribute to the beading, there were a lot of people who would come back again just on their own, just to see like what was going on, see how like the progress was. Because a lot of it, like a lot of those folks, Socrates Park was also kind of like their backyard. They're from the neighborhood, they walk through there a lot, and they already feel such a sense of ownership with the park and to that neighborhood. This piece is also like a big continuation of a piece from 2018 that I did at Franconia Sculpture Park. And that's really where this like communal beading sessions came out. And at that time it came out because of a necessity. I was only there for like 5 weeks and it had to get done. Shout out to Amber White. She is here and she was working at Franconia at the time and was one of like the huge helps in the beading. But at that time, we did these beadings with the folks that were at the park, some local schools, and then just people who would come and visit. So I think it's a way of pulling in the community, having folks feel like, this is their piece too.
Yeah, definitely. And Patrick, I love this through line between sort of Charlottesville and Socrates, and even I was reading sort of your own Brooklyn home and the plants and garden in that, and sort of your collaboration. You collaborated with some of the nurseries in the area, and relatedly, sort of Philip asked if the plants were collected locally. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so it's funny because this piece for me is one of my least collaborative pieces in a practice that is normally just like full of a million different brains and hands and hearts. But I do want to just shout out to Eric Matthews and Terrence and True, who are very real collaborators in this piece in that they helped water it when it was still warm out. It was sort of an informal rotation, and it was absolutely essential to the project. For those of you on the internet, these are folks that are the grounds crew at Socrates, and they're amazing to work with. And I guess it's also kind of an active collaboration with these plants and the insects and creatures that populate that space. But the plants all came from a variety of nurseries that work in the tri-state area for the most part. And specifically about 80% of the plants that I got came from a nursery called Glover Perennials that works with a lot of the plants that I got from them were grown from seeds that were Long Island provenance. So meaning they like collected these seeds and then grew them from on Long Island and then grew them from those. And it was so cool to be working with people who, I think that there's a horticultural and ecological perspective where a lot of gardeners are trying to figure out how to make gardens and spaces that foster healthy ecosystems and biodiversity by making sure that the plants that are in a place are from that place so that the creatures that live in them and that eat them can recognize them and be nourished by them. And I think so that's like the kind of resurgence of native plant gardening and the popularity of that. But I also think that there's just something, I can't remember where I was going with that, but I think that's enough. It's the nurseries that I worked with were indeed local, yes.
And sort of related to that process, a question is being asked about sort of your process and how it changed or did not change from the concept stage to the planning stage to the final piece. Obviously, there's lots of purposely lots of change as the weather changes, but I think this evolution and how you thought of it is interesting.
Yeah, it's a cool piece because it looks so different than it did when I started. Mm-hmm. And I planned it that way. There's so many interesting species that I actually love just as much in the winter as I do when they're like green and lush and blooming. Like a lot of these plants have beautiful seed heads that the little flowers that are on them end up being these kind of like wispy little seed heads that stay through the winter. And the branches are like these calligraphic moments. And even as the grasses dry out and go dormant for winter, there's this really interesting layering of the different textures and also the different, like pretty drastically different colors of those grasses. There's like a whole spectrum between like yellow, copper, tan, black, and then still some green. And it's just amazing that like when you work with something living, it's alive. So I just see this question from Millicent that just says that she was curious about the process of working with non-human voices and whether or not I guess that's for later. Is that when are we?
Yeah, no, you can go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to say the process of making this kind of it changed a bunch. The like specifics of the design changed a lot, partially because there were all of the protests happening and there were all of these continually evolving questions around what it meant to be a white cis man and a white anti-racist artist and a white practitioner of horticulture in a predominantly white field that shouldn't be that way. And so there's a lot of the details and kind of like little nitty-gritty parts of the design changed, but from the very beginning, I was working with these plants because I was interested in what it looked like to kind of shift our conversation to these kind of things that we don't think of as normal factors in the conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you. And yeah, just to end, I'd be curious to hear from each of you about your current or future projects, and sort of on a broader note, thinking about, you know, any hopes for monuments of the future. Jenny, I love you calling your Offshore a future monument. And each of you are sort of, I don't know, like remixing the past and the present and the future in really vital ways, not just for monuments, but for, you know, how we make sense of our histories and how we make sense of sort of the world around us and each other. So I'd love to hear sort of any future projects, but maybe more importantly, future hopes.
Maybe I'll start again. I have a couple of things going on, but I actually have come to think that I really want to take the pennants that came out of this project on the road, kind of, and take these pieces further, because I feel like they can, in a way, be a standalone piece. And I've made site-specific work before, and I was aware that I was going to feel sad at the end when I have to destroy the whole piece. So I almost deliberately thought, how can I have a part of this piece that will live on? And so I'm currently talking to potential venues where the cage part with the pennants attached, or maybe even just the pennants attached to somebody's building or something like that, could perhaps find some new temporary homes where their messages could go further to reach different audiences. I'm still busy making them, and so that because I sew them by hand, and so there's still several coming through the process, and there's increasing numbers that I'm attaching to the fence, because it took a while to actually get messages from inside the jails. It took much longer, which finally did happen. So that's still to come. Yeah, but that's my current thinking is where else could I bring these pieces that were collectively made, but that have so much to say, could speak to new venues as well.
I'll go real quick. So I am excited to say that all of these plants, there are almost 900 plants in this piece, and they all have homes after this project. So they will go on living, many of them in the New York City area, through connections that I have with gardeners and organizations in the city. And then I just want to put a little shout out to the universe. Like, I want to make more work like this, and I want to do it in collaboration with other people who are excited about the ways that plants might help us broaden the conversation around and complicate the conversation around what it looks like to be an anti-racist artist, or what it looks a white artist, and what it looks like to be and for me, a white artist. And I'm also just excited about folks who know a lot more about ecology and biodiversity and these concepts than I do, because I'm sort of a novice with some of the science behind it. I've worked in horticulture for like over a decade, but I didn't take a lot of science in school. So yeah, so if anybody's like, yeah, I want to make this with you next time, please get in touch. And just, yeah, I think that's all. Those are the kind of future things about this project.
Well, future things about this project for me is, you know, I think it's going to be up in the park until the beginning of April. Beyond that, I plan on salvaging what I can from this work, keeping like all the beads, but also trying to like reuse these materials. But you know, this piece does not have a home. If anybody has a home for this piece, let me know. But yeah, I don't have the place to store it. But I do have other plans for other gates, nowhere slotted for anywhere, but just like in my brain. And then future works. Now I've been working a lot with ideas of sound. I'm working on this piece that has a portion up at the National University of Singapore at the museum over there that is working with this book. It's a book called Okinawa's Tragedy from 1987 and has firsthand experiences and accounts of the Battle of Okinawa by Okinawans who lived through it. And with this piece, along with the author and my father, who is the illustrator, and also my mother helped out with part of the sound piece, and it's growing as well. But it's basically kind of like a sound piece that is also an audiobook, taking these narratives, presenting in this different way, and you know, translating these histories into a different medium to be absorbed by all different communities. And yeah, and then my wish for the future of monuments, I don't know. I don't know if we need any more monuments, but if we have to keep having them around, I hope that we can have them from a more diverse pool of voices, that they represent the communities that they live in and champion the folks that they're representing.
Yeah, here's to that. And thank you all so much for this rich conversation. Thank you all in the chat and the question box for being so engaged. I hope we were able to answer some of your ideas and questions during our conversation. And yeah, I'm excited to, as Aya said, sort of be in a whole series of conversations with this wonderful cohort who are thinking so generously and diversely about monuments. Sarah, if you want to pull up the last slide and tell us a little bit about what's coming up.
Yeah, so thank you all for being here and for leaving your thoughts in the chat. It was really wonderful to see people so engaged. And thank you to the artists, of course, Patrick, Jenny, and Aya. It was really so wonderful to hear about all of your work. It's so meaningful and so important. And so our conversations with the 2020 Artist Fellows will continue. We have 2 more scheduled. The next one is coming up on Tuesday, February 9th. And then we also have a series of Instagram takeovers that are part of this virtual programming effort with our fellow Artist Fellows. And Aya will be taking over the Parks account on Instagram at Socrates Park this weekend, so stay tuned. And just a really quick shout out, we also are releasing a series of programs related to Jeffrey Gibson's project in the Monuments Now exhibition. And next Wednesday, we are releasing a documentary film of a performance by violinist Laura Ortman on Jeffrey Gibson's installation at Socrates. And I think that's all for now. Thank you again. Did I hopefully, oh, one more really quick thing I wanted to mention was just to say thank you to the Deborah Freelander Fund, which helps support the Artist Fellowship Program. All right then. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Everyone.